Senator from West Virginia.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to speak in a seated position.
Without objection.
Madam President, I come to the floor to wholly support the comments of my colleagues, the Senator from California and the Senator from Arizona, to speak about a matter of great importance to me personally, but more importantly to the country. The Senate Intelligence Committee's entire study of the CIA's detention interrogation program, I'll just call it the program, is the most in-depth, the most substantive oversight initiative the committee has ever undertaken. I doubt any committee has done more than this. It presents extremely valuable insights into the crucial oversight questions and problems that need to be addressed by the CIA. Moreover, the study exemplifies why this committee was created in the first place, following the findings of the Church Committee nearly 40 years ago. And I commend my friend and the committee's leader, the Senator from California, for shepherding this landmark initiative to this point. For years, often behind closed doors and without any recognition, she has been a strong and tireless advocate, and she deserves our thanks and recognition. It is my hope and expectation that beyond the initial release of the executive summary and findings and conclusions, that the entire 6,800-page, 37,500 footnotes will eventually be made public, and I'm sure it will, with the appropriate redactions. Those public findings will be critical to fully learning the necessary lessons from this dark episode in our nation's history and to ensuring that it never happens again. It has been a very long, very hard fight to get to this point. Especially in the early years of the CIA's detention program, it was a struggle for the committee to get the most basic information, or any information at all, about the program. The committee's study of the detention program is not just the story of the brutal and ill-conceived program itself. The study is also the story of the breakdown in our system, Madam President, of governance that allowed a country to deviate in such a significant and horrific way from our core principles. One of the profound ways that the breakdown happened was through the active subversion of meaningful congressional oversight, a theme mirrored in the Bush administration's warrantless wiretapping program during that period. I first learned about some aspects of the CIA's detention interrogation program in 2003. When I became vice chair of the committee, at that point and for years after, the CIA refused to provide me or anybody else with any additional information about the program. They further refused to notify the full committee about the program's existence. You remember, there was always the gang of four, the gang of six, or the gang of eight. They'd take the chairman and vice chairman, take them down to the White House, give them a flip chart, 45 minutes with the vice president, and off we'd go. Senator Roberts and I went down by car and were instructed we couldn't talk to each other on the way back from one of those meetings. It was absurd. They refused to do anything to be of assistance. The briefings I received little or no insight into the CIA's program. Questions or follow-up requests were rejected, and at times I was not allowed to consult with my counsel. I'm not a lawyer. There are legal matters involved here. They said we couldn't talk to any of our staff, legal counsel or not, or other members of the committee who knew nothing about this because they had not been informed at all. It was clear that these briefings were not meant to answer any questions, but were intended only to provide cover for the administration and the CIA. It was infuriating to me to realize that I was part of a checkbox exercise that the administration planned to use and later did use so they could disingenuously claim that they had, quote, in a phrase that I will never be able to forget, fully briefed the Congress. In the years that followed, I fought and lost many battles to obtain credible information about the detention and interrogation program. As vice chair, I tried to launch, as has been mentioned, a comprehensive investigation into the program, but that effort was blocked. Later in 2005, when I fought for access to over 100 specific documents cited in the Inspector General report, the CIA refused to cooperate. The first time the full Senate Intelligence Committee was given any information about this detention program was September 2006. This was the year after the program, this was years after the program's inception, and the same day that the President informed the nation. The following year, when I became chairman, the vice chairman, Kit Bond, and I agreed to push for significant additional access to the program. For heaven's sakes, at least to allow both the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee on a full basis to be informed about this. And also to include our staff's counsel on these matters. We finally actually prevailed and got this access. I think I withheld something from them until they agreed to do that, which enabled us to have much-needed hearings on the program, which we proceeded to do. As chairman, I made sure that we scrutinized it from every angle. However, the challenge of getting accurate information from the CIA persisted. It was during this period that the House and Senate considered the 2008 Intelligence Authorization Act and a potential provision that set the Army Field Manual, which is the only way to go, it set that as the standard for the entire American government, obviously including the CIA. This would have effectively ended the CIA's intense interrogation techniques, a term eerily sanitized in bureaucratic jargon for what in a number of cases amounted to torture. As chairman, I knew the inclusion of the Army Field Manual provision would jeopardize the entire bill. I thought it might bring it down. People would think it was too soft or too radical or whatever, which I was committed to seeing happen and signed into law, that is the bill. But in the end, it was an easy decision. I supported including the end of the CIA's program because it was the right thing to do. And I did it because Congress needed to send a clear signal that it did not stand by the Bush administration's policy. This is not just going to be a critique of the Bush administration, incidentally. The House and Senate went on to pass the bill with bipartisan votes. And although the Bush administration vetoed the bill to preserve its ability to continue these practices, it was an important symbolic moment. In the same period, I also sent 2 committee staffers, as our chairwoman has indicated, to begin reviewing cables at the CIA regarding the agency's interrogations of Abu Zubaydah and al-Nashiri. I firmly believe that we had to review those cables, which are now the only source of important historical information on this subject, because the CIA destroyed these tapes, which they had done of some of their interrogation sessions. And they destroyed those tapes against this explicit direction from the White House and the Director of National Intelligence. The investigation I began in 2007 grew under Chairman Feinstein's dedication and tremendous leadership into a full study of the CIA's detention and interrogation program. The more the committee dug, the more the committee found, and the results were uncovered are shocking and deeply troubling. First, the detention interrogation program was conceived by people who were ignorant of the topic and made it up on the fly, based on the untested theories of contractors who had never met a terrorist or conducted a real-world interrogation of any kind. Second, it was executed by personnel with insufficient linguistic and interrogation training and little, if any, real-world experience. Moreover, the CIA was aware that some of these personnel had a staggering array of personal and professional failings enumerated by the committee's chairwoman, including potentially criminal activity, and should have disqualified them immediately, not only from being interrogators, but being employed by the CIA or anybody in government. Nevertheless, it was consistently represented that these interrogators were professionalized and carefully vetted, their term, and that became a part of the hollow legal justification of the entire program. Third, the program was managed incompetently by senior officials who paid little or no attention to critical details, and it was rife with troubling personal and financial conflicts of interest among the small group of CIA officials and contractors who promoted and defended it. Obviously, it was in their interest. Fourth, it was, as the chairwoman has indicated, physically very severe, the program, far more so than any of us outside the CIA ever knew. Though waterboarding was received always the most attention, there were other techniques that I personally believe, one in particular, may have been, in fact, was much worse. Finally, its results were unclear at best, but it was presented to the White House, the Department of Justice, to the Congress, and to the media as a silver bullet that was indispensable to, quote, saving lives. That was their mantra. In fact, it did not provide the intelligence it was supposed to provide, or that the CIA argued that it did provide. To be perfectly clear, these harsh techniques were not approved by anyone ever for the low bar standard of learning useful information from detainees. These techniques were approved because the administration, lawyers, and officials were told, and therefore believed, that these coercive interrogations were absolutely necessary to elicit intelligence that was unavailable by any other collection method and would save American lives. It was simply not the case. For me personally, the arc of this story comprises more than a decade of my 30 years of work in the Senate, and one of the hardest fights, I think the hardest fight I've ever been through. Many of the worst years were during the Bush administration. However, I did not fully anticipate how hard these last few years would be. How hard it would be in this administration to get this summary declassified and to tell the full story of what happened. Indeed, to my great frustration, even after months of negotiations, endless negotiations, significant aspects of the story remain obscured by black ink. I have great admiration for the President, and I'm appreciative of the leadership role he has taken to depart from the practices of the Bush administration on these issues. His executive order formally ended the CIA's detention program practices, and it's a good example. It's a great example. And so it was, therefore, with deep disappointment that over the course of a number of private meetings and conversations, I came to feel that the White House's strong deference to the CIA throughout this process has at times worked at cross purposes with White House's stated interest in transparency and has muddied what should be a clear and unequivocal legacy on this issue. While aspiring to be the most transparent administration in history, this White House continues to quietly withhold from the committee more than 9,000 documents related to the CIA's programs. I don't know why. They won't say, and they won't produce. In addition to strongly supporting the CIA's insistence on the unprecedented redaction of fake names in the report, which obscures the public's ability to understand the important connections which are so important for weaving together the tapestry, the administration also pushed for the redaction of information in the committee study that should not be classified, contradicting the administration's own executive order on classification. Let me be clear, that order clearly states that in no case shall information fail to be declassified in order to conceal violations of law, inefficiency, or administrative error, or prevent embarrassment to a person, to an organization, or to an agency, close quote. In some instances, the White House asked not only that the information be redacted, but that the redaction itself be removed so that it would be impossible for the reader to tell something that was already hidden. Strange. Given this, looking back, I am deeply disappointed rather than surprised, that even when the CIA inexplicably conducted an unauthorized search of the committee's computer files and emails at an off-site facility, which were potentially criminal, and even when it became clear that the intent of the search was to suppress the committee's awareness of an internal CIA document and review that corroborated parts of the Intelligence Committee's study and contradicted the public CIA statement, the White House continued to support the CIA leadership, and that support was unflinching. Despite these frustrations, I've also seen how hard Chairman Feinstein has fought against great odds, stubborn odds, protective odds, mysterious odds, which are not really clear to me. I've tried to support her thoughtful and determined efforts at every opportunity to make sure that as much of the story can be told as possible, and I'm deeply proud of the product that the committee ended up with. Now it's time to move forward. For all of the misinformation, the incompetence, and brutality in the CIA's program, the committee study is not and must not be simply backward-looking condemnations of the past. The study presents a tremendous opportunity to develop forward-looking lessons that must be central to all future activities. The point has been made, and I thoroughly agree with it, that the vast majority of people who work at the CIA, and there are tens and tens of thousands of them, do very good work and are working very hard and had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. But if this report had not been released, the country would have felt that everybody at the CIA, and the world would have felt that everybody at the CIA was involved in this program. So it's important to say that that was not the case. It was just 30 or 40 people at the top. Many of the people that you see on television blasting this report were intimately involved in carrying it out and setting it up. The CIA developed the detention program in a time of great fear and anxiety, an unprecedented crisis. But it is at these times of crisis when we need sound judgment, excellence, and professionalism from the CIA the most. When mistakes are made, they called for self-reflection and scrutiny. For that process to begin, we first have to make sure there is an absolute, accurate public record of what happened. That we are continuing to do. The public release of the executive summary and findings and conclusions is a tremendous and consequential step towards that end. From some, I expect there will be the temptation, the fact, to reject, to cast doubt, to trivialize, to attack, or rationalize parts of the study that are disturbing or are embarrassing. Indeed, the CIA's program dramatic divergence from the standards that we hold ourselves is hard to reconcile. However, we must fight that short-sighted temptation to wish away the gravity of what this study found. How we deal with this opportunity to learn, to improve, will reflect on the maturity of our democracy. As a country, we are strong enough to bear the weight of the mistakes that we have made. And as an institution, so is the Central Intelligence Agency. We must confront this dark period in our recent history with honesty and critical introspection. We must draw lessons. We must apply those lessons as we move forward. Although it may be uncomfortable at times, ultimately we will grow strong and we will ensure that this never happens again. I thank the presiding officer and yield the floor.
Chairman.
The senator from California.
Madam Chairman, I know the time for recess for caucus is approaching, and I know there are other members on the Democratic side that want to speak, and it is now time for a member from the Republican side. I'm going to ask unanimous consent that the recess be delayed for 5 minutes so that the distinguished senator from South Carolina might speak.
Is there objection? Without objection.